cluster feeding. We're going to chat a bit about cluster feeding today, sometimes known as bunch feeding, loads of different names for it, fussy baby, the witching hour, whatever you want to call it. And I know that a couple of you have maybe went through this already with your own babies or your older children, and just want to chat through about what to expect with cluster feeding, what's normal, how you can help, how you can cope with it, because it's a challenging part of feeding. So we'll get started. So what is cluster feeding? Cluster feeding is when babies suddenly start feeding much more frequently in clusters. So this can be in the morning. Some mums find that in the morning they get up and their baby is just attached to their breast for the whole morning. It can be in the evening, and it's very, very common for it to be kind of between the hours of 6 and 10. And sometimes we call them fussy evenings, or, you know, the witching hour. I even find with my 5 and 7 year olds that, you know, they can be a wee bit fussy in the evening. It's a time of day that, you know, between dinner and bed, that we're all a wee bit fragile and tired. And so it's the same for babies. That time of evening, it's really, really common for baby to want to be fed really frequently. It can be every hour, it can be every 10 minutes. And it is really draining for mum. So around about day 3 to 5 is when mum's mature milk comes in. So up until then, it's colostrum that we have, which is this liquid gold. It's a higher density of milk, and it's in smaller quantities. But as the mature milk starts to come in, you might find that baby is wanting to be at the breast constantly. They'll do these spells of cluster feeding, especially in the evening. And part of the reason for that is to bring in your milk supply. So a lot of mums will tell us, oh, I'm worried that I don't have enough milk. Does this mean that she's not getting anything? And actually it means the opposite. It means that your baby is encouraging your milk supply. And it's important that you respond to your baby so that they can tell your body to make the milk that's needed. So as we know, breastfeeding works on supply and demand. If your baby demands it, your body will supply it. So your baby demands it by putting in their order at the breast for the next day even. And they might seem like they're having little short feeds. It might be wee 10-minute feeds. It might be big, long half-hour feeds. Or it might feel like they're all just never off the breast in that whole time. But that's them putting in their order for the next couple of days. And the more baby feeds, the more milk is produced. Every time baby suckles at the breast, sends signals to your body that says this milk is needed and this is exactly how much is needed. And the most important thing is cluster feeding is completely normal. So it can be alarming, it can be worrying, and it doesn't really feel normal, it doesn't feel natural. It feels, oh, lots of mums start to doubt you know, their ability as a mum, their ability to feed, but it is completely normal and you're not alone. So why do babies cluster feed? So there's a lot of theories around this. There's been different research done over the years that has been proven and disproven. One of them is that perhaps babies have a mature nervous system, but then there was some research done on babies in Mali who don't cluster feed in the evening, and they don't have that fussy period at night. And it was suggested that maybe this is because the babies are carried all day in a sling. So cluster feeding can be just to feel close to mum, and that is a little tip for helping with cluster feeding. If you're finding that your baby is really fussy in the evening, a way to avoid that could be worth a try, having baby in the sling and having baby really close all day. They are tanking up, hopefully for longer periods of sleep. So this isn't true of all babies. Obviously some babies are still going to have these little periods of sleep and getting up regularly for feeds, but we hope that all of that hard work of mum sitting, being stuck on the end of the couch from 6 till 10, 6 till midnight, means that baby is going to start to sleep a little bit longer. Something to remember is that cluster feeding isn't just breastfed babies that do it. Formula fed babies do it as well. They have this fussy period where they just want their mum, they want fed, nothing really seems to settle them. And a positive way to think about it is that at least with a breastfed baby, you do have the breast to offer, because you can't overfeed a breastfed baby. Whereas with a formula-fed baby, you have to really pay attention to how much milk baby's getting, and they can be overfed. It's not really a great way to soothe baby. Another reason why babies cluster feed can be to encourage your milk supply. So as I said before, breast milk works in supply and demand. So if you have maybe had a period where you've not been very well, or you've had to be away from your baby and your milk supply starts to dip, it can be that baby will cluster feed to bring that supply back up. Often mums will think that that means that they have a poor milk supply, but actually it's the opposite. It's baby trying to rectify it. Also in those early days, early months, babies are still putting in their order for how much milk is needed throughout the day. So cluster feeding really helps with that. Another reason can be for developmental leaps. I know personally, especially my first baby, he's now nearly 8, but I do remember back to the days of him feeding all night long, and I just felt like it was never ever ending. And what I would find is after he had done a period of that, something would happen developmentally. So he stood up at the side of the couch and started wanting to cruise about the furniture, or his first words came. There would be wee things like that. So it's all going on in their wee heads. Babies are constantly developing and learning new things. So your milk really, really helps with that, and that closeness and that attachment with mum really, really helps with that. Another thing can be pain relief. So if baby's got any wee tummy upsets or earaches, which are really common in small babies, they can cluster feed to help to soothe the pain. Your milk is a fantastic painkiller. It's nature's painkiller. So it really helps. The feeling of them sucking and swallowing at the breast can really, really help with pain relief. It might even be something that's developing within their body. So around the kind of 4 to 6 week mark, baby's gut is doing a lot of work at developing. So babies are born and they're not fully developed all their internal organs. So it can be that there's a small pain there and they want to feed really, really regularly because it soothes that pain. Not always, it doesn't mean that they necessarily have colic or they have anything really wrong. But of course, if you did think that it was a pain that was something more so than developmental, then we would definitely say get in touch with your healthcare professional, your midwife, health visitor, or your GP. It's also great practice for baby. So this is a new skill that you and baby are learning together. Even by 3 months, 4 months, baby is learning all the time because they're growing so rapidly. So they're learning the best way and practicing the best way to latch onto your breast to get the most milk that they can have. So that can be another reason why they kind of want to get a big session in before bed of this feeding, so that they've got lots of practice in before they go to sleep. And also for the lovely reason of just being close to you. You're all they've ever known, and you're all they want. So it's not making a rod for your own back. It's not spoiling them. They're not manipulating you. All of these things get branded about, but they do want to be close to you. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the 4th trimester. It's a really common thing that in the first month, couple of months after giving birth, there is actually a 4th trimester that baby is still developing and still needs to be close to mum and needs mum to continue growing and developing. So enjoy those cuddles. They're so special. Okay. So moving on to feeding cues, we just thought we would slip this in here because it is good to help in those cluster feeding periods for you to know what cues you're looking out for, so that you can get to baby before they get to this point of being really upset and it being really distressing for everybody, because those cluster feeding evenings can be really stressful. They can be stressful for mum, baby, anybody else in the household. So if we can limit that stress, then that will help you to cope with the cluster feeding. So some early cues, you might recognise some of these from your own baby, just them starting to stir, waking up, moving their mouth, opening their mouth, turning their head. I know my wee boy used to always turn to the side as if he thought there was a nipple there. They might put their hands up to their mouth. This is getting a little bit, I'm getting really quite hungry here, mum, you've missed those first ones. They might start to physically move about and stretch. But really what we don't want to get to is the crying stage. That's knife and fork on the table, I'm starving, I want my dinner. So we want to try and get to baby before they reach this point. And that can help to calm the whole situation down and can make the whole thing just much more manageable for everybody in the household. Does anybody recognise those signs? Anybody get any different signs? Another thing to bear in mind is the size of your baby's tummy. So I don't know if anybody's seen this image before. It's a great wee image to help us to remember just how small their wee tummies are. So a day old, a baby's tummy is only about the size of a cherry. It's tiny. It grows quite rapidly. By 3 days, this is a walnut. It's not a walnut, is it? Some kind of nut. I always think of a Brussels sprout, but I couldn't find one with a Brussels sprout. So it's around the size of a Brussels sprout at 3 days. By a week, it's about the size of a small plum or nectarine or apricot, whatever you want, a small piece of fruit. And even by about 3 to 4 weeks, it's only about the size of a large egg. So it's really not big at all. It doesn't take much to fill. And it also doesn't take long before it's empty again and it's needing fed again. So it's always worth bearing in mind when you feel like this baby has been on my breast all day long. Why is there no filling her? Because really, babies poo and pee a lot, and it really doesn't take much before their wee tummies are empty again. Okay, myths and facts. So you might recognise some of these phrases, some things that we find very unhelpful when a baby is on at the breast. They're obviously not getting enough. Oh, they can't need to feed again. You just can't have enough milk. Mum's starting to wonder, should I introduce a bottle? You know, if you've got your mother or your mother-in-law or your partner or whoever it is that's your support at home, starting to put these seeds of doubt into your head because your baby's feeding frequently, you could start to think, should I be introducing a bottle? And really that's not completely necessary, and we know that cluster feeding is normal. They're manipulating you. So as I said before, you can't overfeed a breastfed baby and you can't spoil a baby. Get those cuddles in. They do not have the mental capacity to manipulate you. Some mums start to think something must be bothering them. There must be something. And as I said before, if you really were genuinely concerned that, you know, it wasn't just in the evening, it wasn't just at a certain time of day that this cluster feeding was happening, and they seemed upset and they seemed to be, you know, in some sort of pain throughout the day, definitely get in touch with your healthcare professional. But cluster feeding in the morning and between 6 and 10 at night, same time every day, is completely normal. And this is one that there was a bit of research done some years ago that suggested that mum's milk volume is lower at this time of day. But there was subsequent research that suggested that's actually not true. In fact, mum's milk volume is not lower. The volume of calories in mum's milk between the hours of 6 and 12 is actually higher than the rest of the day. So it's a great time of day. though it doesn't feel like it for us, it's a great time of day for baby to be feeding lots, encouraging your milk supply and getting all of that lovely fatty milk. It helps them to grow and develop. It can be that you may have a slower milk flow at that time of day, not for everybody, but that can explain why babies maybe being a wee bit fussy, maybe coming on and off the breast and just can't get comfortable. They're getting a little bit impatient that your milk's taking a little bit longer. And this is where we would suggest a bit of support from one of the peer supporters. We're always on the end of a private message. If you've got a breast buddy, if you've got a one-to-one peer supporter in Ayrshire, we're so lucky to have all this support around us. So definitely get in touch with one of them if you think that it might be due to a slow flow of milk. And there are things you can do to help with that. There's dangle feeding, there's breast compressions, all sorts of things that you can do to help. But it's always good just to know, to bear that in mind, that if you have a slower milk flow at that time of day, that explains why baby's being so fussy and being so impatient. And some mums come to the conclusion that their baby must have an allergy. Maybe it's something that I'm eating. And a lot of mums do, they change their diets when their baby's cluster feeding. Baby gets to cluster feeding, they've had a week of it, they're exhausted, they're frustrated, and they think, well, if I can try, you know, taking dairy out my diet, or is it this, is it that? And then that just, they see that things aren't actually getting any better. It just puts more stress onto mum. It's just another thing for her to think about. But it's a common thing that lots of mums jump to that conclusion that baby must have an allergy and there must be something wrong. But that's where it's great that you're all along at this session today and you can see that cluster feeding is completely normal. Again, if you were genuinely concerned and you had other symptoms of an allergy, a rash, if baby was being sick after feeds, definitely talk to your healthcare professional, your community midwife or your health visitor. But cluster feeding isn't a sign that baby has an allergy. So here we have the lovely Lindsay with her baby. So Lindsay's all set for a night on the couch with her baby, cluster feeding away. She's got her snacks at the ready, she's got a drink, she's got the remote close at hand, she's got her phone close at hand. The best way to cope with cluster feeding is be kind to yourself. Grab that support around about you, whether that's your partner, baby's dad, grandparents, your peer supporter, your network on social media of other breastfeeding mums. Reach out to them and tell them, I'm finding this really hard. This is really hard work. And none of us are ever going to say to you, well, you need to stop breastfeeding then, because we know that that's not the answer. Get your snacks ready, get your drinks ready, get yourself a great box set to get tucked into in Netflix and get yourself comfy. The worst thing to do would be to introduce a bottle at this point. So some mums do think that, well, is she not getting enough? If she's not getting enough from me, then maybe I should be introducing a bottle. But we know that introducing a bottle jeopardises a breastfeeding relationship. And I thought this was a really good quote from the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine. There are common clinical situations where evaluation and breastfeeding management may be necessary, but supplementation is not indicated, including the infant who is fussy at night or constantly feeding for several hours. So it's not really a reason to introduce a bottle. Introducing a bottle can lead to teat confusion, it can lead to feeds being missed and your supply dipping as a result. So the best way to cope is everything that's here. I've not put any of the practical things on here, but just to talk them through. If your baby is particularly fussy, something that some mums find helpful is closing those blinds, closing the curtains, all distractions are switched off, and creating a nice, calm, soothing atmosphere for baby. Another thing that often mums find is they're not sat like Lindsay is, nice and comfy on the couch here. They're standing up with baby and they're rocking baby. So rocking and feeding at the same time can be really helpful and can soothe baby who's a wee bit more fussy in the evening. But for me, the main mechanism to cope is knowing that it's normal and getting all that support around you at the time. You should be doing nothing. These are our best friends. I don't know about anyone else, but during those cluster feeding periods, I did a fair bit of Amazon Prime shopping, and I think I watched all of Netflix. Netflix was completed. Have the remote close by, make sure you're drinking plenty and eating plenty. We know that it takes an extra 200 calories a day to produce breast milk. And every time you sit down to feed, it's like running a marathon. I don't know about anyone else, but that dry mouth is real. And just make sure you keep drinking, keep eating, and get yourself nice and comfy. Got your phone close at hand. There's nothing worse than sitting down and you realise your phone's on the other side of the room and you're stuck under a baby. So just making sure you've got all of these things at hand. All of these things on the screen just now are something that your support network can help you with. So if dad, your partner, or your grandparents are feeling a little bit helpless because they can't feed the baby, these are all the things that they can get sorted for you. Make sure that you've got everything at hand that you need. They're bringing you meals, they're bringing you drinks, bringing you cups of tea if that's what you drink. They can do everything else. So I know a couple of us have got older children as well. So that would include, you know, taking the older one off up for their bath and getting them ready for bed. It sounds obvious, but remembering that that's a really good way that they can support you. And here, if you want to play back this video, I'm telling them that's the really good way that they can support you. So blame me. The slides aren't moving along very fast. So if you're expressing, some mums choose to exclusively express. I'll explain the picture first of all, because I know it looks a bit weird. So this was my toddler when my youngest was a baby. He came toddling through to the living room. I was sitting feeding her, and he said that Mummy Pig's expressing her milk. And this was the shower out of a Playmobil toy, and Mummy Pig attached to the shower cable. So I thought, well, that's great. They don't see it, then they don't learn it, do they? So he must have been learning. So if you are expressing, cluster feeding is still relevant. So what we often tell mums who are exclusively expressing is to pump to replicate what baby would be doing. So if, for example, baby is in special care in the neonatal unit, or mum's away from baby for any reason and she's expressing, it's advised to pump to replicate what your baby would usually be doing. Try and pump it around the same times of day that baby would be feeding. And if that means in the evening they're usually cluster feeding, then you can do cluster expressing, which would involve 10 minutes on the pump, 10 minutes off, 10 minutes on the pump, 10 minutes off. And this is really good at boosting your supply, keeping your supply up if you're away from baby for a night. And also if baby is in special care in the neonatal unit for any reason, you can't be near your baby, it helps to establish that supply that's needed. So we're talking about very small babies, and I know that all of your babies are under 6 months, but there are lots of reasons why babies might return to cluster feeding. And just wanted to get that in there. This is me feeding my 2-year-old at the time. She wasn't very well that day. She was a wee bit poorly, and although you can't tell by my face because I know I was getting my picture taken, I was fed up that day of why is she feeding so much? She never feeds during the day. She was at the point of she fed in the morning, fed in the evening before bed, and that was it. But this particular day, she was just grabbing at my top constantly, wanted mummy milk all the time. And it did turn out that she had a wee bit of a virus going on that had been working on her. So illness can be a reason why babies start, or toddlers start cluster feeding again. Teething is a big one. So as I said before, breast milk is a natural pain relief, and it can be particularly good for teething with it being in that area of their mouth. Pain, as I've already said, for all the reasons that they do as a baby, to reconnect with you. So if you're a wee one, you're thinking about going back to work, you might find that baby wants to have lots of milk when you when they return home from whatever childcare arrangement you've got. That's completely normal, and that's them reconnecting with you. The great thing about that as well is they're passing on they're passing on the germs that they've come into contact with throughout the day to allow your body to make the antibodies needed to fight those infections and germs. So it's a good thing. It doesn't feel like it at the time, and it can be exhausting and frustrating, but it's great to reconnect with them. They might be going through a wee growth spurt, which, as we know, children do all the time. They don't stay in clothes for any length of time. They might be wanting the extra calories to help with that growth spurt, or there might be a wee developmental leap, like some new words that they're learning, or they've just started in a nursery, things like that. So there's lots of reasons why babies and toddlers might return to a bit of cluster feeding. Again, all completely normal. And that's us, believe it or not. Thank you very much for attending today. If you have any questions, this is the email address, ayrshire@breastfeedingnetwork.org.uk, or I believe you've all got my own email address as well, that I sent out the reminder. But I'm going to stop screen sharing now, and I'm going to put it over to you if anybody had any questions, any comments, any support that you need about anything today. That's what me and Lindsay are here for.